Welcome to the Pioneers in Pixels audio podcast, hosted by Sanjay K Khetarpaal, CEO of Marketing Markers, a digital marketing agency. Here we have discussions with some of the leading attorneys. Disclaimer: the podcast is for educational purposes. Please reach out to attorneys for legal advice.
Good morning, everyone. This is Sanjay K Khetarpaal. I own a digital marketing agency, Marketing Markers, based out of New Jersey. And today I have with me Mike Conte. He is a family and divorce attorney. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Sanjay. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Great. So, Mike, what we're going to do is this is kind of going to be an education session for a lot of people, and with your extreme or a lot of experience in the area of family and divorce-related cases. Before we get into more details of asking a few direct questions on those areas, tell us about you. Tell us about your background. Tell us your story. How did you got into this? So go ahead.
Yeah. So way back when, I had initially a job in the judiciary. Before I was a lawyer, I was a probation officer, and initially I actually was the kind of probation officer that handled criminal probationers, and I had people reporting to me, and I was doing home visits and that sort of thing, which has nothing to do with family law. But while I was doing that, that was also around the time when I was just married. I had my first child back then. I thought I would apply to law schools since I was already working in the courts, and I applied to several law schools, got into law schools. I transferred at that point in time from my first position that was located out in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, I was able to get a transfer to Trenton, New Jersey. I continued to work in the judiciary, but the only available job was in child support enforcement. Mm-hmm. So while I was going to night school for law, I was working during the day as a probation officer, and I was enforcing a caseload of about 1,000 child support cases. Had several different duties in that department, including bringing enforcement cases to hearing officers to enforce child support cases. I got to know the family court judges at that time because I was bringing same-day appeals up to the judges of those child support cases. And then everything sort of coincided so that I graduated from law school and I got to know some of the family court judges. I applied to be a law clerk for several judges. I was very, very lucky to have gotten a clerkship with the presiding family court judge at the time in Mercer County. Her name was Mary Jacobson. I then was the clerk for the next presiding family court judge, Catherine Fitzpatrick. And after that, I just went into a career into a small boutique family law firm where all we did was divorce and family law. I stayed with them for roughly 10 years. And since 2021, I've been out on my own in my own firm called Conte Family Law.
Oh, this is awesome. That's pretty good. So let's get into a little bit more of the work you do, something which can help our listeners better on family and divorce. So what's the most common misunderstanding about the divorce process? I'm sure you have a lot of experience and a lot of cases you've seen it. What do you think in your experience is the most common misunderstanding?
There's just a whole wide range of different misconceptions, misunderstandings, and sometimes there's just two. I think when a lot of people come to the divorce process from different cultures, there's kind of a little bit of a moment where a lot of people are very off-put and struck by the critical differences between the way that they may have managed their affairs in their household and the way that New Jersey law will be viewing a case. For instance, in New Jersey, if there's somebody who's the primary wage earner and the other one earns less money, there's a great emphasis in continuing to achieve the marital standard of living with a support obligation, generally that goes from the higher earning spouse to the lower earning spouse in a divorce. Some people don't understand that there's going to be this sort of thing. Some people believe that gender has a tremendous amount to do with who's paying and who isn't, who's obligated and who isn't. And it's just not the case. The law is gender blind, color blind. You have to apply the facts of the case to the law of the state, and a result will come out of it. And that's where family lawyers come in to try to better educate people that come into them, help them understand the process, and get them to modify maybe their expectations in what can be achieved in a divorce and how things should look post-judgment for them so they can move on.
And that's very interesting. And actually, I've been talking to a lot of attorneys too on this one. Something which comes up is that there is always people come in with a lot of what you call as false beliefs that, hey, the divorce process is going to be like smoother. And they get a lot of shock that when they start going through the process. And, oh, I got to do this. Oh, I need to know that. Financials, legal, emotional. There is so much going on there. It's very, very overwhelming. So when people come to you, how do you manage these kind of the sensitive nature of the divorce? There is a legal aspect of it, but there's a lot more sensitive aspect or emotional aspect to it. How do you manage that?
So, I mean, the first thing is to understand, I think, is that there is no one right way to go through the divorce process. I mean, that's first and foremost. I think actually one thing that some law firms and some lawyers make the mistake of doing is trying to throw everybody into a one-size-fits-all sort of way of going about things. And some people just don't need all of the bells and whistles or other things that go into certain other processes. If you're making $500,000 a year and you have several $1 million of assets and you have 3 children and they're all minors under the age of 12, then you have a lot of complexity just built right into the facts of your case. But certain people come into the process and maybe they're 65 years old. They have already sat around the kitchen table with their spouse and made at least the framework for an understandable and workable agreement that makes sense to both people. And when people come in with that kind of factual circumstance and their kids are all grown up and a lot of the complexity is not part of their case, then it's a lawyer's job, I think, who's being responsible to keep it that way and not make it overly complicated and expensive and anxiety producing. And there's definitely ways to do that. I have certain cases where people come into me and I'm able, just based on a framework of an understanding, to draft a marital settlement agreement that could be offered as a proposal, right, very early on. In other cases, there's enough of a cooperative understanding with the other spouse that you could pretty quickly see that it may make sense in that circumstance to move straight into mediation or something. And there's going to be other cases that are far more difficult, and they need all the discovery process and all of the other things built into litigation and potentially a trial. But that's the first thing. Is I'm very flexible and I'm very keyed into what do the particular circumstances of the particular person in front of me warrant and what's the right way to go. And I try to build a strategy around that person and those facts.
Interesting. See, that's the thing I like about you, because I've talked to a lot of people, not really like on a podcast point of view, but in general, also a lot of attorneys. People don't talk about that aspect of it, like one size fits all. Everybody's just describing it, that what's the process it. And I'm glad to hear that people talk about one size fits all. I mean, you talking about that part that is not applicable. And you're taking time to get into the details and figuring out what will work for this particular case. And every case is different. Every case has its own nuances. I like that. That's
great. I mean, I'll say that one of the biggest problems with lawyers generally is it's a profession that's about knowledge. And unfortunately, over time, these people who have this valuable commodity that's in their brain, have been very guarded with the secrets of their knowledge. They're trying not to give away anything for free. And it's created this atmosphere where people simply don't trust lawyers. They go into lawyers in a confused situation. They have nowhere else to turn except for some lawyer to try to help navigate something that seems very chaotic and insurmountable at a moment of tremendous anxiety in their personal life where they're just trying to hold it together. And they're met with people who are trying to hide certain facts sometimes. And it's a very disconcerting position to be in. I try to do just the opposite. I mean, since I've been on my own, I start with trying to help people. I mean, I almost feel like the Hippocratic oath that doctors is an important thing. Like, I want to do no harm. I want everyone who walks in to not walk out any worse for having met with me. I at least want to arm them with some kind of knowledge and give them some sort of path forward, even if it's not with me. I mean, I'm contented to try to help strategize with them and get them to a better place so that they could move on in a better way.
That's incredible, because that's the main thing. Because people, even if people are going through this, any kind of challenges, whether it's a divorce or any kind of issues where they need to reach out to the attorneys, they hold themselves back. Like, I don't know what I'm getting into. The moment I get into, I'm going to get slapped by like hundreds of dollars, like for hourly fees, something. I'm not going to get a legal advice. And you won't believe that how many websites are getting created. I know from a marketing point of view, which are just people put a question in there and they are expecting answers, like cheap answers, because again, if they get some answers, the answers are not complete, but they are getting those answers. Again, why are we getting into these things is because they're very worried or scared or kind of going to an attorney and talk to them. Having that kind of an attitude is fantastic. It at least take that fear away. Like, okay, you know what? Let me talk, and that's okay. I can talk to the guy. At least I'm getting more knowledge to move forward. I love this.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned those websites, and you're in the marketing world, so you're very aware of this. But for instance, Avo is one of the big sites where there's a question and answer piece. I do have like a link in part of my Avo profile that does link these questions in when they're on very particular questions that have to do with divorce and family law issues. And I sometimes do chime in and answer those questions. Almost every case of that, though, is a question that can only be partially answered. That's one thing that people, I think, and this goes to your other question about misconceptions about things, like people, they have a certain set of facts in their head and they're like, wow, I need an answer to these facts. But what they don't quite understand is that there's certain nuances that go to all these little bits and pieces. Like sometimes somebody says, well, I'm 5 months after a divorce and I want sign my child up for ballet lessons and now the other parent won't pay. Well, the very first part of the answer is, what does your marital settlement agreement say about this sort of thing? And so any lawyer is going to have to do some digging and research exactly what the history is. Maybe these people have been up in front of this judge 5 times in the last 2 years. What did the judge do with different past issues? Is the judge already fed up with them? So there could be certain nuances to the way that any lawyer is dealing with any of these issues if they're being reasonable. Sometimes people come to me for a consultation and I tell them, you really don't want to hire me. Let me tell you about that. I mean, so for instance, like my background is in child support enforcement, right? So I have this certain sort of niche, but the problem when people come to me for a child support issue specifically without any other tangential issues, well, that's somebody who's either paying or receiving an amount of support for a child it's meant for necessities. So if there's a problem there, adding an attorney's hourly fee to dealing with that circumstance could make the cost exceed the benefit. And I have to be very real with people on that first day. I'm running that calculus in my mind and just trying to do what makes the most sense for those people.
No, that makes total sense to me. Total sense to me. Total. Yeah. All right. So this is great. So moving on to there's another aspect which I wanted to run it by you, would probably get your opinion on that. How has family law evolved in terms of non-traditional families? And I know that there's a lot of other kind of religions also get in the mix of it, then how do you do all of these things? How do you manage this thing? And
Yeah,
examples so that I can just kind of ground myself better, or the listeners can do that too.
it is complicated. For instance, I have in my practice, I've represented people from many, many different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, from Christians, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, agnostics, and atheists, everything across the board pretty much that I could remember. There are certain nuances in some religions. For instance, in Islam, they have a marital contract that they enter into, and there's a body of case law that's developed in New Jersey around the enforceability of these. They're called mahars. And there's other things in other religious traditions where the law, it's not that the state is willing to accept basically that the religious law is not part of the state's law. However, to the extent that the religious law has a contractual component, state can enforce contracts no matter what was the impetus for the contracts. So there's that aspect. But whenever there's a case that has that kind of legal nuance, it's something that has to be very particularly researched and understood. In a recent case where there was an Islamic client there, we actually brought in it wasn't really a co-counsel because the other attorney was never fully retained. But when it got into some of the nuances around the Islamic law and the Islamic contract, we did speak to somebody who was a specific expert in that area. And I and my client consulted with that person and they reviewed the facts. So sometimes that's important, just like sometimes a family lawyer may need to bring in a custody expert or a business evaluation expert or an accountant to do forensic accounting work. Sometimes you need somebody who's expert on a very specific dynamic of law, and that sometimes comes into play in those cases.
That's interesting, actually, Mike. But I was thinking from any other like religious point of view. So the religion aspect is very strong, and they have certain things which are kind of law there, but not really written law. Sometimes it is written, but in the native countries, but it is not written as per like the Hindu law or any kind of Islamic law. Then you have a law here, right? And when they try to come together, I would like, hey, my religion saying like this, but you're saying like this, and it's kind of conflicting sometimes, and your job become very critical to bring it together and make sure that the religion respect is there, but you respect the law here too. So how do you manage that? That's kind of very tricky situation or difficult situation in my mind at this point, right?
It could be. I mean, and so the recent case I'm continuing to think about as you're saying this, there was a component where after the divorce was settled, I mean, satisfying the secular divorce in New Jersey does not necessarily satisfy the religious components of divorce in certain cultures.
Right.
And so you could put through a divorce in the state of New Jersey. Now, sometimes what I've done, and this is different in different cases in the same religion. In one case, I recall I did a settlement agreement where the parties agreed in the settlement agreement in the secular divorce to certain procedures that would culminate in the religious divorce being affected as well. In the recent case, there was sort of an observation made that even writing certain things into a secular marital settlement agreement didn't really satisfy the component in one of the parties' points of view, because in that party's point of view, he was saying that, look, in my culture and my religion, this isn't something that could be compelled. We just talked it through, and when it got down to it, there was a very different sort of process, but it was really a contractual process about the physical things that parties needed to do as part of a physical agreement. Each one of these things, like delivering documents by a certain date to a certain place, those were the kind of things that a court can enforce because they're physical things. They're not manifesting somebody's belief or something like that the court can't necessarily enforce. But each of those things you kind of understood, I think, at least I understood, and I talked to my client about it. It was the kind of thing that if you were following through authentically with the idea of what was happening, it culminated the same way. It culminated in a process that would result in a religious divorce as well. That's what everyone understood that we were doing there. It's tricky, it's nuanced, and different personalities that are sitting at the table in the process could have a wide range of different points of view of what they think is acceptable or not. I just try to be sensitive to whatever is going on at that table, listen to what the different people are saying and different proclivities that they have, and trying to meet whatever requirements they think are important in whatever custom and culture that they happen to be in.
It's very interesting. It's kind of, in my mind, I'm just like going back and thinking about it for a second. Like, well, you got that legal way of kind of divorcing done or the process completed, but there is another aspect of it, which is religious. And that also have to happen at the same time, so that the divorce process is kind of complete in like both ways, like legally and religiously, or whatever the situation of the client is at the point. So it's interesting to know that.
Yeah. But in a different tradition. So, I had dealt with those cases were specifically with Islamic clients, but I know there's a whole body of case law in New Jersey about, in the Jewish tradition, there's something called a get, where it's the religious, basically it's a man providing something to the woman in divorce, allowing her to remarry after a divorce. And there's a whole history of bad actors in divorce in Jewish culture, where the man gets divorced, he moves on, but he never provides the get to the woman in their religion. She's basically shunned and can't remarry. And then there's different people advocating for her. And if you dig into it and you look at the history of these gets, you'll see that there was violent situations in the past where people supporting the woman who was not able to get this, would threaten the ex-husband and all kinds of things. There's a whole body of case law in New Jersey around, and it's very tricky. All I'll say is it's very much the same with what I was talking about earlier. People come in with specific facts and circumstances, with specific customs and religious traditions, that any lawyer who is real, they need to be taking a holistic approach and understanding the whole situation and what divorce really means for that person and what they're looking for in their life to be able to move forward. And if that's a thing that they're thinking about, you can't ignore it in the process.
I agree. I think that's a very important step moving forward, because very interesting. All right. So we're moving on from this subject to another one. So what do you suggest, or rather advise, not suggest, advise for the couples who are considering separations or divorce? Like, hey, we're going to go get into the process. Get prepared, because you're getting into in different things, which like legal, financial, and a bunch of stuff going to play in. Kind of getting ready for it to come forward. What would you advise that people should start thinking?
So just by the way that you're presenting the question, what it sort of envisions in my mind is a couple who both are kind of on the same page. And that's not necessarily what happens all the time, but it does sometimes. So,
not necessarily. Sorry, thanks for letting me interrupt you, but not necessarily, because what happens is they had a fight or anything like that, or they want to just get separated. But if somebody hears that, like, listen, I'm gonna go for separation, whether it's they have talked through that or they haven't, but they got to prepare. Like, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, any way you look at it, really all of the anxiety.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't say all of it. A big chunk of the anxiety of people facing a divorce is just the radical change in their life circumstances that they're looking at. They're used to a certain both standard of living, a place where they're staying. They're used to a lot of different things. And now all of those things are, called into question as to whether and to how long they can continue. They're facing separating from that other person, performing different domestic responsibilities, or having to be more independent and financially, and wondering to what extent they could have certain expectations for certain things. The very first thing that's going to happen no matter what your circumstances are, is there needs to be a shared understanding of financially what the situation is. In certain households, one or the other party really knows 100% of what's going on with the finances, and the other party may not know anything. I've had some people come in who literally, we go down a list of, oh yeah, we bank at this bank, but I have no idea what's there. Oh, I know that there's certain accounts, but I don't know where they are or what they hold. So there needs to be a disclosure, and that would be absolutely part of the litigation process. And so if the other side is the one who holds all that information and they're not going to give the information up voluntarily, well, the court system is there and the litigation process is there to first and foremost get them the information they need to understand the landscape. So that's really important. One thing people can do to help themselves very early on is get that through their heads. They may then voluntarily start providing this kind of information to the other side. That immediately should at least allay some level of anxiety, because they begin to see the same landscape. But nobody gets to keep it all. If savings developed as part of the marital enterprise, it's considered marital property. It's going to be equitably distributed. If a house was purchased during the marriage and then increased in value over time, that's marital property. Different accounts that were saved or retirement accounts that were saved during the course of the marriage will be considered marital property and divided. So that's a very early part of the process that's important. And then the next question is, people need to at least, I think, have a consultation with an attorney to help them understand what they're facing. And then maybe there's several things from there. They might be in a position right away to go to a mediator. There is a lot of good mediators out there, and they would immediately have a requirement to share information, financial information, and come up with certain documents, et cetera, to be able to proceed that way. But sometimes you can't do that. So I think getting in the office with a lawyer, paying a consultation fee for at least to have, walking out of there, hopefully that day, a better understanding of what they're most likely, the lawyer will be able, hopefully, to be able to at least say, this is probably, at the end of your case, the range of outcomes, so that people can start to wrap their mind around those outcomes and start thinking about how to get, from where they are to where they need to be.
That is so interesting, because you're absolutely right that most of the time people coming in, they have no idea. At least one of the person have no idea where it's coming in. And I believe that topic itself is so big that I can spend another hour or two on this one talking about it. There are so many variations come in the picture, and then when you have estate planning kind of thing jumps in, and that whole thing changes a little bit differently. Yeah. It's a very meaty tough. Okay, let's move on to another interesting part. Technology, pandemic has changed a lot. A lot of things have changed. What have you seen things have changed? Like, are you guys having divorce calls over the Zoom? Just joking, but I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah. So absolutely is the answer to that. That was one of the biggest and most radical changes was before the pandemic, the courts absolutely across the state required in-person appearances for all kinds of different things. And during the pandemic, of course, courthouses were shut down across the state, and so everything was via Zoom. There was also, unfortunately, a tremendous backlog of cases across the whole, not just the state, by the way, across the whole country, probably the whole world. And so there was a judge shortage in New Jersey in the middle of it all, and other problems. So there is a tremendous backlog that several counties right now are still digging their way out of. But going to your question again, Zoom calls became much more prevalent. And since then, since the pandemic, it's pretty much a memory at this point, as of 21, 22, the courts generally continue to use Zoom to a certain extent, with some recognition that there's just certain types of proceedings that don't need attorneys to be driving an hour to stand for 5 minutes and talk to a judge. So there's small things called case management conferences that only require very brief discussions with judges and other things, where sometimes they had done those telephonically in the past. Now they're pretty standard to be done via Zoom, and some certain judges still have other normal hearings via Zoom. I know the judge in Mercer County right now who's on the divorce docket, she does hear motion oral arguments on Fridays via Zoom the last couple of times that I've had them. Although if people want to appear in person, I believe she entertains it either way. So there's that. The other big change that happened in New Jersey is before the pandemic, filings were done with paper. And you put your papers together in several different copies of everything. 2 copies went to the adversary, 2 copies went to the court, and there was a filing done. You got stuff back in the mail, et cetera, et cetera. The court very, very quickly implemented a electronic filing system that goes across the boards, actually. Like in civil filings, they use a platform called eCourts. In family court, they've been using something, the acronym is JEDS. It stands for Judiciary Electronic Document Submission. However, they're also transitioning to eCourts, which is very good. eCourts, when something is filed, does a couple of things. It automatically notifies the other side that something was filed, first of all. And second of all, it also then will save a copy online of the PDF documents that were submitted. And that's just, such a refreshing thing from where we went 2019, where it was all paper and we all had giant filing systems and a million filing cabinets. I'm able very easily at this point to maintain basically a paperless office. Although I still have stacks of papers here and there, I save everything that I get electronically. And so filing is all done that way.
That is so interesting. When you were talking about that, my mind was like, this pandemic has moved the technology like a decade ahead. But I was thinking that now the AI is coming. I don't know what that is going to do with it. Are we going to have virtual judges now?
I'll tell you what, though, that I'm seeing is everything that seems to be coming out of the New Jersey State Bar, the American Bar Association, everybody is talking about how AI is going to change things. It's all over the place. It's in all the journals and everything.
Yeah.
And some of the capabilities are really staggering. I mean, once I had learned that, I believe ChatGPT, the most recent engine, not only is passing the multi-state bar exam in the 90th percentile, but also state. I mean, it's really amazing. And then what I understand, like one of the capabilities I understand that AI is able to do is processing several pieces of discovery or briefs and just pulling the law out of these documents and then putting them into a memo for like an attorney or for somebody who's processing that information. It's really amazing.
No, I know. It's the thing which I'm thinking, you just mentioned e-court. I was like, it's going to be e-judge, e-law.
Yeah,
it's kind of
one of the things, well, you make an interesting point. Like, are we going to have, like, one of the things that I was thinking is, for instance, one of the things that lawyers do is during oral arguments, lawyers listen to the way questions are being presented, and they might stand up and say objection. And then they will say to the court, I object on such and such ground. This is hearsay, Your Honor.
Yep.
Well, what is going to be faster than AI in recognizing whether you're asking for hearsay or asking a compound question or doing certain things that the court rules say you're not supposed to be doing? So, I mean, if I could imagine it, then I'm sure I'm not the only one imagining it. And so I think that it's realistic to think that at least judges may have tools on the bench in the short-term future that help them recognize certain objections and help them rule.
Well, let me throw something at that. What if both the attorneys are ChatGPT type of attorneys? That'll be fun. Like you are objecting and
well, I mean, that's really
you need an e-judge for that. Like, listen, guys, I'm going to pick out so much stuff from one side is like, oh, AI using the tool to from one attorney. The other attorney is using the AI tool too. I mean,
Right.
and
Right.
then and it's gonna be like more fun. I'm just saying it, but
Well, fun
interesting
is one
laughingly,
way
but yeah.
to put it. Yeah, I think, I mean, like anything else, whenever we take a big technological step forward, I think the people who are most ingrained in the old way of doing things get filled up with worry. And then the younger people sort of get kind of enthusiastic about having maybe a way to elbow their way into something and get good at something in a different kind of way than it's being used. So
Yeah,
it'll be interesting for sure. Yeah.
it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
So, question on the other aspect of it is, how is marketing or a digital marketing has helped you in particular in the past, or you think can help attorneys and everybody else in going forward in the future?
So my marketing has, I mean, it's interesting because I think just like any small business member who's not a marketing expert, I did what I knew to do when I got into my own firm, which is establish a website with
Mm,
certain things that I'm sure are good and other things that I'm sure are quite imperfect. I also made sure to go through each of the search engines. There's various different search engines that
mm,
people get pulled into when they do a Google search. And so there's big lawyers.com, lawyer.com, there's a whole bunch of different ones. And I went to each of those profiles and I've updated all my information. I tried to sync each of these different things with one another and et cetera to at least make a presence sort of out there. I think,
mm,
another thing, of course, word of mouth these days is not just word of mouth. Word of mouth is like when somebody asks for, hey, does anyone know somebody good at this on a Facebook post? Then there is a Facebook presence and a social media presence and all this other stuff. And I think that's the reality of any business right now, any law firm who's trying to establish themselves and have a presence out there needs to have this kind of digital presence. I've been lucky because as a one-man operation, I've generated enough business without having to pour a lot of money into overhead. Do not have to worry so much about it. But I've constantly thought that if I wanted to take the next step and start hiring paralegals, associates, et cetera, and develop this business into something greater, that would be a necessary component to,
I believe so. Yes, I believe so too. Awesome, awesome. This has been a great conversation and interesting one too. Mike, thank you for your time. But before we go, I would like you to give us the details that how people can reach out to you via website, phones, emails, whatever. That will help them to kind of say that, hey, I have a question or something, I want to reach out to you. So what do they do?
Yeah. So again, my name is Michael Conte, Conte. Website is www.contefamilylaw.com. My email address is simply michael@contefamilylaw.com. And my phone number is 609-366-2738. And if anybody is experiencing any kind of family law issue, facing divorce, has a child custody problem, a post-judgment issue after they've been divorced, they're running into issues with their former spouse, and they just need somebody to sort of talk to and to help them try to understand the dynamics and help them do a cost-benefit analysis to figure out the next steps, I'm very happy to talk to any of those people, and they should reach out, telephone, email, anything.
Great, great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been a great conversation, and I'll talk to you whenever I meet next time to you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Sanjay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Pioneers in Pixels. We hope the discussion was enlightening and informative, giving you a clearer insight into the complexities. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and never miss an episode. Join host Sanjay K Khetarpaal next time for more insights and interviews with leading legal experts. Until then, stay informed and empowered. This has been Pioneers in Pixels. Thank you for listening and have a great day.